Before we get started with this video, I want to be able to make one thing clear. Valve did not pay for the hotel or airfare to be able to get from Ohio to Bellevue, Washington, and this entire trip would have not been possible without the sponsors. Specifically for today, skins.cash. Check out the link in the description below if you want to try and get rid of some of your unwanted Counter-Strike, TF2, and Dota 2 skins. You're able to just immediately put them into the skins.cash inventory and immediately get a quote. If you use the link down in the description below, you will get an added 3% to that quote, and you'll just get the money immediately from that trade. Yeah, thank you skins.cash for helping me get to Valve. Now, without further ado, this is the long-awaited first interview with Gabe Newell. This is supposed to be an interview with the VR team, but about 85% of people talking is Gabe talking about virtual reality. The second interview will be 2 videos down, as the next one is the interview with the Steam team, and then just Gabe and Eric Johnson talking about Valve in general. But without further ado, here is the VR team, which is mostly just Gabe Newell, talking about VR and the future of the hardware and software in Valve's eyes.
Have you guys seen this controller before?
The knuckles.
So, I mean, this is sort of a good example of what we're hoping to get. So one of the questions you might ask us is, why in the world are we making hardware? So right now we're building 3 VR games, and what we can do now is we can be designing hardware at the same time that we're designing software. Like, this is something that Miyamoto has always had, right? He's had the ability to think about what the input devices and the design of systems should be like while he's trying to design games. And our sense is that that's going to allow us to actually build much better entertainment experiences for people. So the idea isn't like, oh, we suddenly thought we could make more money by building hardware, because hardware's actually traditionally been kind of a lousy, low margin business. But in order to take what we think are interesting steps forward in terms of the kinds of experiences we design, we need the ability to be thinking more about everything that a customer is doing. Yeah.
Insights?
So, I mean, you guys have seen the first controllers for the Vive, right? And you can see that these are pretty significantly different than the Vive controllers. And that process came from doing the first generation, working on our games. The people working on the games are like, you know, here's stuff we would actually use, right? And then they'll mock it up, and then we'll do a hardware prototype. They'll go back, change the game, and process is iterative. So yeah, and I think that we then, you know, so we have our own internal development process, and then we take it out to, you know, our development partners, other game developers, and say, so this is what our thinking is. So Robin Walker will sit down and say, this is why we think that this is important for what we're developing, and this is how we filter that or express that in terms of the next generation of hardware design. Then we ask other people, you know, does that match with what you're thinking or not, you know, and get feedback from them. So to us, it feels like it's going to allow us to accelerate that. It feels like we've been stuck with mouse and keyboard for a really long time. Yep. And that the opportunities to build actually much more interesting kinds of experiences for gamers were there. We just needed to sort of expand what we can do. But it's not about being in hardware, it's about building better games, about taking bigger leaps forward with kinds of games that we can do.
You said 3 games?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, mouse and keyboard are awesome, right? It's more, so the presumption is when you're trying to build something new that you're going to have a lot of failures, right? So you want to be in a position where you can go and do something that, if you're not failing, then you're probably not exploring the potential space wide enough, and hope, you know, we're sort of optimistic, right? We think VR is going great. It's going in a way that's consistent with our expectations. We're also pretty comfortable with the idea that it'll turn out to be a complete failure, simply because if you're not trying to do things that might fail, you're not actually probably trying to do anything very interesting at all. And so we hope that we'll find stuff that gamers will go, oh, this is awesome, right? This is a huge leap forward. You know, and you can always be surprised, right? Like, personally, I thought the DS was kind of stupid, right? It's totally wrong. I thought Sony was going to crush Nintendo in that generation of handheld devices, right? I hadn't worked on it, right? I hadn't tried to design any games for it. And clearly the DS ended up being the winner. The flip side was, the first time I played Wii Sports, just to continue using Nintendo as an example, I was like, oh my God, there's so much opportunity, there's so much potential here that we're all going to go discover. Then it sort of turned out that Wii Sports, they pretty much nailed it, and that was it. Everything else just ended up, there was less sort of innovation to mine in that direction. So, even when you're doing it, even when you even have a really good initial instance proof that there's potential, you still can find out that there wasn't as much there, or that there was surprisingly more there. And the only way you do it is by making a bunch of experiments, getting a bunch of other people to try experiments, and then finding out what you can find out. So the great thing from the sort of VR ecosystem is people shipped games, the games are profitable, people are working on their second generation of games that incorporates everything that they learned and that they saw in the other sort of first generation of games. And the assumption is that as we continue sort of this ongoing evolution of game design, tools, and hardware, that we're going to find stuff that really creates game experiences that are, take advantage of the unique characteristics of VR. VR is not going to be a success at all if people just are taking existing content and putting it into a VR space. If you took, one of the first things we do is we got Half-Life 2 and Team Fortress running in VR, and it was like, it was kind of a novelty, but we wouldn't ever expect anybody to justify, customers or developers. That was purely a development milestone, but there was absolutely nothing compelling about it. Same way, like, nobody's going to buy a VR system so they can watch movies. Instead, you have to sort of hope, you aspire, you're optimistic that, the unique characteristics of VR systems will cause you to discover a bunch of stuff that just isn't even possible on any of the existing platforms. Content is, it's absolutely, if there's something that's unique and awesome, we don't think if you took the existing VR systems and made them 80% cheaper, there's still not a huge market, right? There's still not a really incredibly compelling reason for people to spend 20 hours a day in VR, right? We actually think that if anything, most of the interesting stuff is going to be happening on the high end, right? That we're actually resolution constrained, we're CPU constrained, we're GPU constrained, we're, new controller, that's where the interesting stuff is going to happen, not on the low end of the market. Once you've got something and you say, okay, this is the sort of the thing that really, causes millions of people to be excited about it, then you start worrying about cost reducing. Sort of an old joke that premature cost reduction is the root of all evil, but want other people to talk. I just talk all the time otherwise.
We gathered a couple stats just to help with paint the picture of where VR is at right now, and as Gabe said, our expectations are that our expectations are being met and exceeded by where it's at right now, and we're really excited about where it's going to head going forward. But just to give you a quick picture, we have about 1,300 apps, VR apps on Steam right now. Over the second half of 2016, we saw 86% user growth in terms of monthly active users using VR on Steam. And we have 30 apps now, 30 VR apps that have made over $250,000 on Steam. So
in terms of revenue.
In terms of revenue, yeah. So that set of kind of a picture of users on the platform, games, content coming onto the platform, and success from developers that have shipped paints to us a really good picture of a healthy market now. And like you said, we're really excited about kind of where things are going to grow and how we see that becoming bigger and bigger titles on Steam over the years. We had talked about, looking back at the history of Steam back when it was starting out and what that looked like in its first year, and we're not even through a full year of VR yet. and it's pretty striking the difference in what the VR market looks like right now versus what that looked like back then. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on that at all. But.
The trajectory is what we want to see, right? We're looking at a rate of growth and just a size of community and size of number of titles that is exciting. And we're putting a bunch of effort into making that growth continue and achieving really a threshold that's about VR becoming a viable business for everybody really in the industry, like AAA publishers and all the way up and down the line. So we're putting a bunch of energy and time and thought into product development, software development, and platform features, and some things that we've got cooking that we're not ready to talk about yet, but they're all kind of under the umbrella of furthering that growth in order to achieve that kind of threshold. That's what we want to see for VR.
I think we should be clear, right? So there's sort of kind of two schools of thought. One is, let's create an iPhone-like walled garden and tell our investors that we're going to charge rent on an entire industry and control our competitors' access to those markets. And we're going to have huge numbers, and it's going to be huge, and we're going to advertise the shit out of this, and show people watching movies, and it's all cheap mobile devices, right? So I'm lumping together a whole bunch of people, and then there are a bunch of other people who are like, wow, we're at the beginning of this, and the Vive, the most expensive device on the market, is barely capable of doing a marginally adequate job of delivering a VR experience, right? And we have to figure out all sorts of other problems before even the hardware question gets answered, much less what are going to be the compelling content. So we view it as, this needs to be open, right? We need open hardware standards, we need open software standards, because that's what developers need in order to go and explore the space. And as those pieces come together, then we'll start learning from our successes and failures, other people's successes and failures, and then we'll start to see lots and lots of great applications. But it's not a cost reduce in advertising, let's look like a console launch. It's much more like 1981, and the PC has just come out for the first time, and nobody knows, it's like...
Everybody's going to use it for recipes.
Everybody's going to use it for recipes. No, he's totally accurate, right? If you look what people were saying, it's like, you're going to use it to store recipes and keep your device in your kitchen. And, then it was like this other weird thing, this spreadsheet thing, which none of us had, nobody had ever used before, suddenly turned out to be a really compelling argument for businesses to start having these PCs being smuggled in, even though the IT guys hated them. So that's where we sort of view it. So what we look at are small, independent sort of inventor people able to profitably do stuff in this generation? Yes. Are we starting to get good iteration on the hardware side? Yes. Do we have a good roadmap going forward? So there's that little bit of a tension between some people going out and saying, there'll be millions of these. And we're like, wow, I don't think so, because I can't point to a single piece of content that would cause millions of people to, justify changing their home computing at all, right? It's like a great thing for enthusiasts and hardcore people, and where we are today is way further down the road than we were a year ago. But it's just going to be the slow, kind of painful fits and starts kind of thing. So there is that dichotomy in worldviews. So when we say we actually are really happy with how things are going, it doesn't match up with what other companies were saying who had to justify,
like a hockey stick graph at their launch, right?
Right. Well, we think customers and developers are actually pretty rational. Customers make a good decision. Like, that sound like I used it, my friend has one, I saw this new game or other piece of content, and it now makes sense for me to buy it. And developers, the ones who are working on it, are super excited, right? There's nobody who works on VR and says, I'm bored with this, right? Everybody comes back and says, for every idea I had in my first generation product, I have 10 ideas now. So to us, that feels like the kind of fruitful, frothy, excitement that you want to see when you're aspiring to build something that's going to be worth more and more of a wider audience's time and dollars.
Just one or two questions based on the content itself, and if the questions are too specific, feel free to tell me no. First of all, this picture came out a couple days ago. This picture was somebody testing the Vive in your offices, and you're saying 3 games. I'm not sure if all 3 of them will come out, but on the picture, people are kind of going crazy because on the screen there is a Half-Life 3 logo. But it says,
I haven't seen the picture, so
it says,
if you want to send it over here.
I'll be the bailiff.
So that's a person playing Arizona Sunshine, but if you pay attention, it's very, very close to the screen itself. There is a Half-Life, not 2, obviously 3 logo, and it says either VR3 or W3. The VR3 makes more sense.
I mean, that's actually news to us.
Oh, is it really?
Well, it's news that the picture's out, but it's news that that icon is on the screen. That honestly, those icons have floated around
Oh,
this
really?
office
Okay.
for quite a long
I
time.
use it to launch Internet Explorer.
So like none of us are going to be able to tell you exactly which icon that is or why it's there because it's not.
Some of the more childish members of our company have worn Half-Life 3 T-shirts to GDC.
Oh, I'm aware. So, I guess as a follow-up to the absurdity of that question, a big pillar right now within at least the Valve speculative community is the initialism HLVR. It's showing up in Dota 2, it's showing up in Destinations updates. Essentially anything that you have that's Source 2 related, there's something showing up related to it. Now the issue is there are a lot of strings that are related to this HLVR, but none of them paint a picture of a real game. Now I know that you're not going to want to give specifics on exactly what it is, but is this even a game, or is this more of like an experiment ground that you use to maybe get ideas for game projects? And then
I'm not going to say anything about the 3 specific titles. The point there was that we're investing in it in pretty.
No, I understand you're not going to say anything about the games, but it.
So you don't want to talk about 3 games. That's fair enough. Are you still working on the lab? Is that a thing, or what's going on with that?
I think it's correct to say that the experiments, like lab experiments, are continuing, but we're not really looking at the lab as a product that we're going to continue to grow and treat like its own ongoing product and service that is going to grow like a traditional
We don't have any
Valve
specific
product.
plans for the lab.
Yeah.
You were saying about.
And so
go on.
I'm going to try to address one of the issues you raised. Is when I say we're building 3 games, we're building 3 full games, not experiments.
Not experiment things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Games that you guys will sell.
Yep.
Yeah.
Are they Source 2 or Unity?
Both, actually.
Oh, really? Okay, cool.
We hope so. And if they don't, then hopefully we learn interesting stuff about it. But we're definitely trying to build stuff that we think will be massive
Another way
deal.
to say it might be like as the Vive was coming out in super early days, it made sense for us to build things that were smaller scale to investigate the capability of VR. At this point, people at Valve don't think it's correct to invest a lot of their time in things that are only going to be experiments or super small scale. They want to be investing their time in something that's going to be meaningful for millions of people.
Well, we think we've learned enough that we can make bigger bets.
I mean,
But
right.
it's important. I don't know if you guys care about this, but for us, everything is an experiment, right? We have this theory.
Yeah.
We think that we can make 3 big games, and we think that we know enough now to do that, and we're going to find out if that's the case. I mean, we're pretty sure that all the other game developers are going to learn positive or negative lessons from what we do, which is sort of where we think we have to
just
be
like-
right now.
Just as we are from them as we build these products.
Right.
I mean, it's not correct to say that we're not experimenting because VR is just so new in general that of course we still are, but the product development that we're talking about is in a different category.
So thinking
There'll be
back-
really clear design choices that we're making in each of these games. They're very different, and
From each other.
in each a game developer will be able to look at those and say, that was great, that was not as great, which is part of from our point of view, that's a useful characteristic of these three.
I think it's worth saying that just getting back to kind of having hardware and software development going on under one roof, that there's a close to home example related to the controllers that are over here, where early on when we were thinking about what should come next for input for VR, I introduced myself earlier as a product designer, and my own take was I was very focused on tracking itself, and that the wands that we had designed in the initial release of the Vive were actually really, really good controllers. I mean, mostly I was focusing on the tracking technology and how solid that was. And my own take about what we should do next was very iterative, based on what we already had out there and people were using, and didn't have a lot of reasons to reinvent that wheel. And it was because we talked to people like Joachim, who works on budget cuts, and a number of other people, and then internally when we began to build our own more significant content, it was the people who were looking at input from that perspective who said, actually, since we're talking about this and potentially building from the ground up on this, we would do things quite differently based on what we want to achieve in our game designs. And that's really where the design of these controllers began in earnest. And because we were developing both game content and working with partners on game content and doing hardware development in-house, we feel like we're now way more confident in our design choices around these things, and people like me get proven wrong for really good reasons.
So I get the feeling we're running out of time here, but there's a bunch of other stuff we want to cover. So it's not just software where the innovation is going to have to occur. There has to be innovation on the hardware side, and we think that once again, open standards are super useful for that sort of thing. So the tracking technology that we developed for the Vive is called Lighthouse. And at this point, there are 500 Lighthouse licensees. And all of those are companies that are building devices. You know, some of them are building headsets, which will be great because they'll have their own take on what makes for a good headset. Some of them are going to be input devices, pursuing different aspects of, the design and invention space. The hardware that goes into it is going to get better. So this is, you want to explain what these are?
So this is just a HTC production retail base. This is our new base station that we're making available to Lighthouse licensees later this year. This is an early engineering model, so anything about this could change, but this is where we're at right now. And the difference between these two is that this one's got two of these spinning rotors in it, where the new one only has one. So it's cheaper, it's smaller,
Less
it's
noise,
lighter,
probably.
less noise, lower power, and we think it will probably track a little better, have a little bit wider field of view. Basically the next generation, better in every way.
So, but that's the kind of stuff that you expect to say, oh, this generation, and then the next one does that better. And from a capability perspective, we're hoping in this generation where we go from room scale, where you're tracking a room size volume, to being able to do house scale, where you can knit together these volumes into an arbitrarily large volume, right? And it's like, will that be the killer piece of it? I don't think so. Is the fact that it's smaller and cheaper and quieter and does better tracking, is that going to be the killer piece of it? I don't think so, but these are all, the kinds of pieces that we expect. We love our controllers, but the odds are pretty good that one of the other people, one of them is going to come up with a controller design where we all smack ourselves on the forehead and say, why didn't we think of that? Thank God we're all participating. Well, our hope is that if we flop, that it's instructive and educational flops to other people,
And that if we flop what we've done with the collection of how the hardware fits together and how the software fits together, that if if we flop in hardware, there are other people making hardware. And if customers choose that better hardware, we're happy with that. Okay. That's good for content. And the bet that we've asked content developers to make is, hey, write to an open standard. And that's why we're working with Kronos on standards for VR, is because we want developers to be able to make this bet whether we succeed or not with what we're doing. We want their software to live on, not be tied to us in any particular way. We want them to succeed.
But when somebody comes up with innovative new hardware, we want there to be a framework where it's easy for them to get all the software developers to take advantage or whatever.
And nobody's in their way of doing that. No one's, an intermediary that's charging them somehow to have access to the software.
On the hardware side, there are a bunch of obvious things. The sort of technology pipeline is pretty clear. Headsets are going to get lighter. They're going to get smaller. The
resolution will go up.
Resolution is going to go up. Field of view is going to improve. Like these aren't sort of speculative things. It's like these are all the pieces that are already, are basically finished in terms of everybody in the headset industry knows how to do them. It's just a question of getting their products out. One aspect of it that's a little less obvious that you guys are going to start to hear about, and you should sort of keep your ears open to it, is that the current headsets essentially are piggybacking off of phone panels, right? And it's kind of random luck that phone panels happen to accidentally give us displays that would work with headsets. And so what we're starting to see is that as people start to say, oh, we're actually going to go and think about what are display technologies, that rather than, can we bastardize phones and phone technologies and use it, it actually turns out that there are a bunch of advantages that HMDs will have that phones don't have. That once you can say you're building something just for a VR headset, you actually can go much faster than the phones go. So we're actually going to go from this weird position where VR right now is kind of low res to being in a place where VR is actually higher res than just about anything else, with much higher refresh rates than you're going to see on either desktops or phones. And that's something that is a result of once the panel technology guys suddenly said, oh, well, wow, there are a lot of advantages to working within the framework of the headset. So you'll actually see the VR industry sort of leapfrogging pretty much any other display technology in terms of those characteristics. It's probably not obvious, from the first generation of products, but you'll start to see that happening like in 2018 and 2019. And so eventually you'll reach the point where, you'll be talking about incredibly high resolutions running at 200 hertz. And that's something that's not obvious right now from what's happening. Do you want to elaborate on that at all?
Just that we, a couple of years ago, it was like pulling teeth to get cell phone panel manufacturers to pay attention and to try to get panels that would fit. The panel for this doesn't exactly fit in a headset, but to get them cut down. And now lots of companies are coming forward with different things they want to do with panels, and they all have different trade-offs, and they're all better than the first generation panels. So it's really exciting to see the component industry come forward. Lots of people are working on lots of different things in VR, and it's all going to go into products in the next couple of years.
And all of them are pretty excited in the PC space, especially, that there's this huge pile of content that if they wire into the open standards correctly, instead of having to kickstart a hardware business and a software business, there's this software business, there's plenty of software to run, and they can ship a piece of hardware that immediately takes advantage of it, which is just not, it's unusual for them to have that ability. So they're pretty excited, and they come talk to us all the time, and because they know where our business is. We're making content, but they come and talk with us about hardware and the deep R&D that we do in hardware, because we share a lot of it.
And last, just because I had a note, wireless is another sort of solved problem at this point. It's more a question of, so my expectation is that it'll be an add-on in 2017, and then it'll be an integrated feature in 2018. AR is just a completely different problem. It's it's a really hard AI problem, much more than it is a panel problem, right? You can completely solve the display problems and still have made no progress on sort of the deeper problem. One of the things you guys sort of need to vote on is I would say I think it's more likely that VR is going to drive much higher computational and GPU loads than we see out of existing desktop games, right? You know, other people are saying, are taking sort of the mobile view, which is, oh, you know, you can do everything that you want to do in VR. Like, I would argue that the smartest thing AMD and Intel and NVIDIA could do is give away VR development systems to software developers, because, you know, we're going to consume the shit out of Intel and AMD CPUs, much more so than, you know, high-end games are doing right now. So that's, you know, that's sort of a perspective you guys need to answer for gamers, but that's certainly our expectation, is that we're going to end up using every possible CPU cycle we can lay our hands on with future VR titles.
The thing that wireless is going to help a ton with is comfort. Okay. The tether is irritating and frustrating, and just being able to walk around freely and move freely without ever getting tangled up is a big deal.
The people who build VR, it's sort of like this trade-off. You say, okay, you know, how much risk am I taking on, and how much of an opportunity am I giving myself? You know, how long is the runway going to have to be before, you know, I really start to see explosive growth? And that's, each developer has to decide that. But I'm pretty sure, though, that there are almost no developers who are working on VR titles who are like saying, oh, I'm going to back off, right? They're all coming back again saying, now I'm going to do more VR.
There might be some, but you could look at them and often say it actually wasn't a fun game. Mm-hmm. So in any ecosystem, in any game, you know, category, some people spend a lot of effort and make something, and it just doesn't happen to be fun. So maybe they thought it was fun, or maybe they didn't play test it enough with other people. The interesting thing about VR right now is it's an enthusiast community that are hungry for content. And so if you do decent experiments and you make sure they're fun, and you're in a cycle of feedback with the community, you're going to have strong sales right now, because
the VR,
because it's a small it's a small set of games. I mean, 1,200 is a lot.
VR customers are like the best possible customers.
Absolutely.
Because they want you.
Yeah.
They're willing to go on the ride with you and take risks.
Yep.
Right? They want you to, you know, keep trying and finding stuff out, because by and large they're fans of the technology, and they want to see it successful.
And they're really active online. They're really active in their communities.
They're participants in the whole.
Yeah, they love early access and betas, and they'll give you great feedback.
Yeah.
So yeah, we talk to lots of little developers who, if they're in that tight feedback loop with their community, they're seeing strong sales, and they're really happy.
Yeah.
They're really happy in VR, and we don't even have to say, well, we think you should stay with VR. They just tell us their next title is VR.
So one conversation we have with some developers is around how they manage their risk, right? It's like, you know, you've got people building proprietary walled gardens who say, you know, be exclusive to our title and we'll give you this bunch of money. And we're like, we hate exclusives. We think it's bad for everybody certainly in the medium to long term, and I'd probably argue in the short term as well. But we're happy to say to people, look, you need to figure out how to manage your risk so you can develop the title that you want to build. So let's have a conversation where we can help you manage your cash flow over the course of the development, so you can go and build the thing you want and get it out to market and start getting your money from where you should be, which is from your customers rather than from somebody else. So, you know, we're perfectly willing to help people do that. And then they say, well, does that mean we have to be exclusive to Steam or exclusive to the Vive? And we say, oh, hell no. That's bad, you know. You guys should be making the best decisions for your customers, not having somebody else trying to steer that. So, but that's when we have conversations with people about that. It's usually around, okay, so how do we pay the bills while we're building our next VR title, not, and that's usually a pretty productive conversation, but it's really about smoothing out risk over the lifetime of their VR investments. But I think all the developers who are working on it have a pretty good idea of what their customers want them to build and, how to make it better the next time.
I don't think it's behaved much differently than what we've seen on Steam over the last 10 years. Because if you make something high quality and fun and have a tight connection with your customers, you're going to have success.
I mean, they're really simple little titles like Blarp is my favorite example, where it's a really simple game, but it's fun. It's not a game you can play without VR.
Sure. I really like the paintball multiplayer game.
Oh yeah, what's that one called?
The one in Rec Room?
That I'm blanking on
No,
right
the
now.
different one.
Think about it. It's
There's
a
a
simple
full-
title, but
there's a
super
full
fun.
quote.
Sorry.
Climb
There's
is
this thing,
one
and
that
I can't
surprised me.
remember.
Like
Which one was that?
Climb Me.
I haven't heard of that.
Climb Me is really fun. Onward is really, really fun. And a lot of us were looking at it originally and saying, yeah, that's, it uses a locomotion technique that all of us would not prefer. Like
Motion
just
sickness might be an
watching
issue.
it. But then you play it and you're like, why am I not motion sick? Why am I having such a good time playing this? Why have I been here for 6 hours? Yeah. So Onward's super.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys very much for watching, and remember that this entire trip, these videos would not have been possible without the sponsor skins.cash. Go check out their website down in the description below if you want to be able to get rid of your unwanted Counter-Strike, TF2, and Dota 2 skins for an immediate quote, and use the link down in the description below if you want to get an extra 3% to the quote that you get. Thank you very much for watching. The next video that will be put up is the interview with the Steam team, where we end up talking to 3 of the people on the 10-person Steam team about the future of Steam Direct, the replacement to Greenlight, Steam support, the Jim Sterling digital homicide lawsuit, and if Steam Discovery actually works. Stay tuned for that. I'll try and get it out as soon as I possibly can, and thank you very much for watching. I'm Tyler McVicker. This is Valve News Network. Have a good day. Adios.